Good morning, PT on Ice. It is Monday morning. Back again for a little Monday with Pop. Got some folks signing in here this morning. I have decided to debut my new eyewear this morning. Thought that would be, it's an intellectual topic this morning, so and my kids and a couple of others, including Allie, have said that my new getting old, can't quite see like I used to specs here, you know, they make me look like a hipster, or at least that I'm semi-intelligent. That's what they tell me. So I thought today I would wear them, debut them, and also to discuss a pretty tough topic. I actually, maybe it's not a tough topic. I don't know. I think it's an important topic, one that really we have to sort of get our hands on. But got to get going on it. So, okay, let me start the clock. So, reminds me of Waldo. That's not very nice. Come on. You're supposed to say, look, you look so smart. All right. So, what I wanted to talk about today, what I thought would be kind of an interesting thing, and one that I think we really need to dive into, because of the state of the world. I mean, in all seriousness, because of the state of the world, we've got to at some point recognize and dive into this idea of, of complete well-being, of complete health, right? So there's a lot of different components there to health. So oftentimes we talk about, so I'm going to have to take these off. I can't even take myself seriously looking at that. We talk about physical health, mental health, social health, and the World Health Organization's definition is a complete state of well-being, right? So that's kind of the definition of health. It's not just, what are your biomarkers, how fit are you, what's your mile time, it's not that. It's complete well-being. It's a sense of peace, it's a sense of rest, it's whatever you want to call that, but that is, a complete well-being, right? So the thing that I think we need to sort of think about is the one that never gets talked about, and that is spiritual health, right? And I don't want to get into this in the sense of thinking of it more in the religious form. I'm certainly not qualified or even remotely equipped to discuss it that way, but much more along the idea of, sort of your inner search for meaning. And so I dove into it a little bit because, in this past week we've seen two very famous, cases of people ending their life with suicide. And I think that we are at a well-being crisis. I put it on Twitter last week, and and it was just sort of like me being pissed for a moment there, and I guess it must have resonated because it got quite a few retweets, and I was surprised by that a little bit, because I sort of thought like I was just kind of getting some steam off by putting that out there, and a lot of people responded and said, yeah, like that's a thing, and so when we see people who are taking their life at rates that we're seeing, who otherwise we would think are experiencing success, right? I mean, you've got, famous designer, famous TV personality, chef. I mean, these are people who we would often consider, like us normal humans would often consider these people to be very successful. And yet in their own, scenario, they're clearly not, healthy. They're not at a state of peace and well-being, right? They haven't achieved this full well-being. So with that in mind, can we really say that we're delivering health? That the world is healthy. We can say the world is successful by many, many means. I mean, we can say that from a dollars and cents perspective. There's all sorts of financial well-being things. So I did a little searching, and ultimately what I found was this article, which I thought was kind of cool. And it's a 2011 article, and they talk about defining and measuring the fourth dimension of health. And it's out there. It's a 2011 article, and it goes into a little bit some validated tools that they looked at to measure someone's spiritual health, like is it actually something that you can measure? And it turns out it is. This is sort of news to me, something that I'm going to dive into a little bit. And I think the reason why was a couple of different factors that came together. The first thing that came together was obviously those events. At the same time, I picked up a book maybe 2 weeks ago, and some of the folks on the APHPT worksite know this. I picked up this book called Anti-Cancer Living. And it was just kind of like a serendipitous thing. I walked into a library, was with my daughter, just happened to pick up this book, just kind of killing some time between sporting events, and I started kind of perusing it, and lo and behold, a lot of the concepts are almost identical to the 5 elements that we talk about: move, fuel, recover, endure, connect. They talk about 6 different things, which basically they've taken one of the elements and kind of split them into 2, and there's just a lot of parallels there. And so I'm about 125, maybe 150 pages into this book. And one of the things that just kind of keeps coming up, and this is specific to cancer patients and kind of like living with cancer, right? Like there's this conversation, this piece about let's not make it a war. Let's not always make it this kind of like tough, masculine, like let's get after it and kill the disease sort of thing. It's much more of like, hey, how can we work with this? How can we figure out a way, because we may not be able to completely cure it in some cases. And if we can let that go and just kind of get at peace with it, then we can start to live a healthy way, and we might be able to be okay. And it tells lots of stories of people who, have lived with really, really bad prognoses for, 18, 20, 30 years and kind of found some peace with it. And so I'm finding it to be a pretty compelling read. And so it's taking me down this road a little bit. And the question that I think we have to ask ourselves is where do we shake out as practitioners there? Where does that line live where we're comfortable talking about it? One of the things that I thought was interesting, I wanted to just kind of read this quote, from the introduction of this article, and I think it's pretty neat. So it's half a paragraph. When we talk of spirituality, it is in the reference to common worldly person and his/her effective day-to-day functioning. We are not talking about shunning responsibilities and wandering in jungles. We are neither indulging in the area of religious dogmas, orthodoxy, or fanaticism. We are not talking of so-called world renouncers, monks, saints, sages, or religious philosophers and masters. Perhaps the time is right when the spirituality needs to be demystified for an ordinary human being by cultivating spiritual practice and temperament, which drive him to ensure optimism, health, happiness, productivity, and creativity. I think there's some real richness there. And I think it's one of those things where I realize, like, I'm not hitting you with some specific information today that I'm saying, hey, go out and do this or try this or here's a success story. I'm really trying to pose the question. I'm trying to get us all to sort of step back for a second, back off the line a little bit and think about the scenarios that we're in. What are we really tending to when the person is in front of us, or the group of people is in front of us, or the population that we're trying to work with is in front of us? When we're talking about tending to their health and helping them to live a higher functioning life, can you live your highest functioning self? Can you be the best version of yourself if you don't have a sense of well-being? If you don't have a sense of peace or a sense of rest, or at least you can't attain that sometimes, like there's certainly something to be said about being restless and striving for success and working real hard. Like I get all of that, and I often feel that way. Like, hey, that's when I'm most productive, when there's that little bit of chaos that I talked about last week. But the bigger question, I think, is that can you actually live the best version of yourself without that sense of peace and well-being? And if you can't, if the answer is no, what are we actively doing to support that? Now, one of the things, of course, you hear me talk about, and my team and others who sort of subscribe to the same mentality, we often talk about, linking people, right? Like bringing groups together, that there's some sense of security and collaboration that comes together with being other people of like mind. There are definitely cultural undertones there. I think I've referenced it before. The Blue Zones, Dan Buettner and his work at National Geographic, and then has become sort of Healthways Blue Zones. They often talk about the Japanese women, and they looking at people who live routinely over 100 years old, and they look at these folks and they say, hey, they have their tight little group, right? Like one of the features of them is this tight little group of 5 or 6 or 7 people who are committed to each other and to the health and well-being of each other. Do we have that? Are we fostering that? Are we willing to even ask the question, right? Like, hey, do you feel restless? There's validated tools in here. They go through a whole list of them: spiritual well-being scale, spiritual assessment scale, spiritual assessment inventory, index of core spiritual experiences, Myers-Briggs type indicator. They're talking about different tools to measure this. But I'm just wondering, are we even comfortable entertaining the concept? And if not, why not? Because it seems, at least when we look around, that there's this crisis of well-being, that people are not at peace, people are not at rest, and that it is creating serious problems. It's manifesting itself in really contagious despair. And so when we see that, and we see that we have tools for communication that are so efficient. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, now even like, walled off communities like the workplace. The communication is so fast and so effective that may not be a good thing if it's a very negative sort of contagion of despair message. I mean, so how are we as professionals going to support that? Now, I don't think it's our responsibility to take care of it. I don't think it's necessarily our responsibility to fix it. In fact, I think sometimes we would do a whole lot better if we would just admit that we can't fix it. But what we can do is support it. We can find ways of approaching it, of beginning to explore it, of poking it a little bit and asking more questions. And I think there's something that we all should kind of look into there. I know I will be. I know that's something that over the next few weeks, like I'm going to try to poke around this a little bit, because we've got to get better at it. There's a skill set there. And it's different than mental health, right? Like I want to make sure that I'm drawing that differentiation. We certainly know that we all could do a better job at supporting people's mental health. But it's even more than that, right? It's that sense of well-being. It's more than just sort of the neurophysiological of the brain and nervous system. It's more than just my own psychological health. There's something else there. And I would say that that's kind of more, if mental health and psychological health is the domain in the brain, then maybe this is the domain of the heart, the person who's restless and the person who just doesn't feel like they're, like they're one, like they don't understand the meaning of why am I here, and they haven't spent time exploring that. And again, I can't say this enough. Like, this is not about religion. This is not about some kind of a belief system. This is just about the idea that there's a consciousness, right? Like as humans, we have a consciousness about the world around us. Whether you want to call that being present, whether you want to call that being mindful, I don't know that we have a practice of it. I don't know that it's widespread. Do we talk about that type of exercise as much as we do fitness-related exercise? And are we making a bit of a mistake to think that we can somehow substitute one for the other? That, like you get on that treadmill every day and you push really, really hard, and if you do, your soul will be at rest. I just don't know that that's the case. I just don't. I think that we all feel it differently. I had a conversation with someone last night about the difference between feeling at peace and feeling at rest. And is there a difference there? And is that just my own sort in my own head? We often talk about that, in our house, like just quiet for a few minutes, like that's just valuable. We know that there are studies out there that are linking physiology, things like darkness and quiet, and that there are health benefits to that, significant health benefits, right? We know that we're starting to see the beginning of things like, hey, go on an electronics diet, shut off your devices for a day. And see what that does. We talked about forest bathing way back when, in Ice Sampler, and literally on Friday on like Good Morning America, in the background at a work site that I was at, there was a reporter talking about it. Right, so we know there's this like desire to find this peace, this rest that we all kind of share. That's a human quality, right? But I don't know that we're fostering it. I don't know that we're exercising it. And if we are, I don't know that we're exercising it well or enough. And so I'll just leave it there. I mean, I've got another couple of minutes here. But I wanted to pose the question. And I wanted us just to start to kind of poke around and think about it. And I guess what I'm going to ask you to do is respond back. Like see what you find. Because this, to me, is very much an exploration. Now, I'm going to go out there and do it. So, you could, I guess, wait. I'll come back and report back with some information that I find. But I'm just beginning to dive into this, and I just think it's so important. I think when we look around and we see these high-profile, cases, we have to know that that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like that's just what's poking above the surface. Kudos to Jerry. I saw Jerry Durham tweet something last week about that, saying, like we're talking about these two famous cases. How many other sort of nameless, faceless people are struggling with this exact problem? And it got me thinking, and I think it should get all of us thinking. And I don't know what the solution is going to be, and I don't know how each of us is going to bring something to that table, but I just think we need to. I think at some point we've got to kind of step up and say, hey, like we're not treating the whole person unless we're treating the whole person. And that there's a consciousness there, and that we have to attend to it. We have to somehow find a way to feed that. Now, I'll of course tell you that we feed it with optimism and hope. Those are the ways that we counterbalance despair. But when you look around and there seems to be a growing and widespread despair, we have to at least acknowledge the fact that we are not achieving total well-being in most, or at least in many. And so somehow we've got to support that. Maybe that's through the environments we build. Maybe that's through the services we offer. Maybe that's through the conversations we have. Or maybe it's honestly just being there to listen. I don't know. I don't know the answers. But I think it's at least time that we start asking the questions. So I'm going to leave it there. I know not big and motivational and pointed today. Maybe not even as angry and sometimes rantish as I can get. But I hope it's something that we can think about as a group, as a tribe. I think that even if we just do it for ourselves before we're willing to take it out on the road. But if we're not addressing that fourth dimension, if we're not addressing that spiritual dimension of health, I think we're missing something, and we're missing it in a big way. The hole in the whole person, I love it. Yeah, Justin, I see that. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's like the donut hole in the middle. Yeah, right in the middle. All right, everybody, 17 seconds. That's going to be about it. It's Monday. Dive into some intellectual this Monday. Dive in a little bit. We'll finish it up with the specs. Have a great rest of the day. Be good. Find Waldo, Ryan. Make it count.